Hello, everyone. This is JM coming at you solo for this little mini episode. This is a continuation on what Richie and I discussed in our last episode, the official episode 5 of Fantasy Writers Toolshed. In that episode, we discussed book covers, and I presented a bunch of research data that showed, yes, indeed, book cover is a very important part of your marketing drive for your book. And then Richie took you on a little tour of a program that we both have come to like called Canva. It's actually a web platform, canva.com, that allows you to do all sorts of different graphic design projects, one of which is a book cover. And Richie led everyone through a process of how to get started on a book cover on Canva. Interesting note, both of us have recently released books using Canva to create our own book covers for these books. So last time Richie mentioned that he was releasing a book called Thoughts on Writing. This is a book derived from his many years of blogging and posting and writing articles about writing, and just kind of like all the knowledge that he's gathered over the past couple of years. Currently, Thoughts on Writing is available on Amazon, and he's donating the profits to charity, I believe. As for me, I am re-releasing my fantasy novella, The Nightingale. This is a remake, a fairy tale remake, which is kind of a full-on subgenre of fantasy these days. So it takes the fairy tale The Nightingale by Hans Christian Andersen and reworks it into a traditional fantasy story, the story of which is heavily influenced on Joseph Campbell's hero's journey. So if you know what you get it, you'll know what the plot is if you understand what I'm saying. So that one, I made the book cover on Canva using stock art from Pixabay, as we discussed in the last podcast, and it just came out good. It just came out really good. Got very lucky. I'm not particularly talented in the visual arts realm, but as we were building that episode, we developed a whole lot of extra content and ideas that we didn't have enough time to share with you. That podcast, as developed, ran over 50 minutes, and we didn't get to everything we wanted to get to. So thus, I'm cutting this mini episode here. One of the things that I did while preparing for the book cover episode was to interview a couple people, a book artist and a former book artist who's now a editor and publisher. I wanted to interview them, and I wanted to talk to them about getting their perspective, the other side of the coin. So in the previous episode, I talked about what it's like for me as a writer to work with a book artist. So we got the writer's perspective, the author's perspective of that relationship. These interviews are going to give you the other side. They're giving you the perspective of the book artist who's working with authors, and what they see is the friction points and the tips and tricks to make that relationship go well. As we discussed in the last episode, I mentioned that there's some things that you can do to make any relationship, whether that be with a book artist, an editor, a publisher, a publicist, a marketer, any third party that you are employing to your benefit. There are things you can do to make that relationship better and to get more out of that function. And first, absolute number one is communicate. You need to communicate what your needs are, what your wants are. They need to know your book. They can't design a cover. They can't market. They can't, publish or edit a manuscript without knowing what your intentions are for that book. What is the story that you want to tell? What is the point of your work? That needs to be, at the front and center of everything that you do, everything you communicate with third parties. And the other thing is being involved in the process. So when you're working with a book artist, Feel free to make recommendations, make suggestions. If you're working with a lower tier book artist that uses stock images, you know, go on the sites and find your own stock images, make suggestions. Hey, I think this one works. I don't think that one works. But at the end of the day, you need to come into be a little bit disengaged. You're not going to get everything that your heart desires. It's not going to come out perfect. This idea that, this image you have in your mind, um, nobody's going to be able to manufacture that perfectly except you. But if you're hiring a book artist, then you're like me. You're not that type of person. So you got to understand there's limitations, and it really depends on who you're working with and what they're doing and how they work. And the other thing is that idea that you might have in your head just might not be a good idea marketing wise. So book cover artists, they should know the market. They should know what is trendy, what sells, what drives interest. So you need to trust them to do their job and to be able to make those artistic choices that are going to make the book cover more appealing to the audience and sell you more books. So without further ado, the first interview that I want to jump into is with he's Niels Christensen. He's one of the uh, in-house book artists for the publisher that I worked for. But actually, both me and Richie work for this publisher, Fiction Vortex. And Niels has been with them forever. He's one of their in-house publishers, and he does one of their in-house book artists, and he does a lot of good work. Let me start off by noting that these interviews, each of these interviewees we're all working on different hardware. Richie and I both have uh, mid-quality USB mics for podcasting. The interviewees were using their phones, so there might be a little disconnect in quality between the different audio streams. So I just hope you just bear with that. So without further ado, we're going to move into the interview. The first thing I asked Niels to do was to introduce himself.
Hello, my name is Niels Christensen. I'm a graphic designer. I graduated with a degree in uh, art, graphic design, and I have been working as a designer since I graduated college in 2010. And how I got into designing specifically book covers, I was working in Idaho, and I knew some of the guys who were involved with Fiction Vortex, which became Story Shop, and they needed somebody to design their book covers. And I had never done specifically a book cover. It would be a new experience for me, but I love illustration and drawing pictures. I was like, oh yeah, it sounds like a challenge, something I would enjoy. And so I started doing their book covers. And it just progressed from there. I got more involved with the company and was able to just kind of fall into it, I guess. And I really enjoyed it. Had a lot of fun.
Next, I asked Niels, from the artist's perspective, why does he think book covers are important?
Covers are very important. Uh, if you are in a bookstore, the first thing you see is the book cover. If you're on Amazon, the first thing you see is the book cover. Unless you're looking for an author specifically, the first impression that you have for your book is the cover. And this kind of goes along with question number 4, and I'll kind of talk about those in tandem a little more in detail with number 4. But uh, your cover needs to convey a message. It needs to have a feeling. It has to bring emotion. It has to bring something along with it. It can't be, and there are several different ways to do that. I wish this was a visual. I wish I could give examples, but um, your cover uh, should convey what the book is about in so many words. With the book Ender's Game, though, a good example, genre specific. The publisher had the designer working on his book cover, and they came back with that uh, spaceship that was coming out of nowhere, and the author was kind of upset by that. He said that that image is nowhere in the book. This doesn't work. It's not something I like. And they said, trust the artist, trust us. We know what we're doing. This is very specific to this genre. This type of cover sells. And he didn't think it would, but he has since changed his tune, and he says that was the best advice I ever got, because that book sold like crazy, and it was because of the cover. People didn't know who he was before that, but they were able to come back and, well, he was able to build a name, and he credits that decision by the publisher with going what the designer thought would be effective because he knew the market. Covers are, like I said, it's your first impression. It's the way you sell your book in most cases. When people go to Amazon, the first thing they notice is the book cover. They'll skip past the descriptions, they'll skip past everything else about the book and go straight to reviews. So they'll go see what other people think, and they'll see what their first impression is, which is the book cover. But in order to get, I, and then they have a higher chance of buying it. They'll read a brief description, reviews, and your book cover. Those are the three main things on Amazon.
So there's a lot of good information there. As we talked in the last episode, the idea that book cover is important because it's the first thing that your audience sees. For a long time, it's just been anecdotal evidence, but we showed in the last podcast actual numbers and data that back that up. That showed a book cover can increase your margins by 30% or more. We also showed, kind of contrary to what Neil said here, um, reviews are not as important as people think. At least according to the one study that we cited, showed of the three um, key marketing topics, so book cover, price, and review. Review was rated absolutely lowest in the 10% margin, as opposed to something like 60 or 70% importance for book covers and something like 20 or 30% for price. Reviews were the least important factor. So next in the interview, I asked Niels basically about his process and how he gets started in developing a new book cover.
First of all, you want to know what the story is about. Is it fiction? Is it high fantasy? Is it like you want to know? Is it romance? You want to know what the story is about first of all, and that's going to kind of determine. Then you want to know where the characters are or who the characters are. Me specifically, in the way I work, I like to try and pick a scene from the story. Brandon Mole with Fablehaven. I like his book covers. I had a chance to meet with the artist who did his books, and it was a great conversation. And how he started the project is he would have his wife read him the book while he would paint, and he would sketch and come up with concepts, and they would pick a scene, and then he would paint a scene from that cover. And that's one way to do it. To find an image that you think really conveys what the book is about. Another way is just sticking with the genre. There are a lot of book covers out there that you can buy the book cover before you even write the book. There are pre-made covers, and a lot of people do that. They'll go out and they'll buy a book cover for $150, and then they'll write the story around that. So really, where I start, it's just trying to convey a message, trying to find out what the story is, and then portraying that on the cover of the book.
Next, Niels and I dove back into the idea of genre-specific covers, and I asked him just for some examples and some ideas about what certain things might make something appealing to a certain genre.
Spaceships fit with sci-fi. Magical wisps or fairies fit with fantasy or fairy tales. If you're doing an urban fantasy, or if you're doing a horror, or um, any of those things, you would want to pick things that would fit with urban. You would want to fit things that fit with horror. That goes into your typography. It goes into the way you, like, you wouldn't want a bright and happy image cover for horror unless you put a horror element in it. Like, say you have a happy uh, scene, princess or wedding, and then you see a scary image in the background, or you see blood stains, or you see a knife, or something that shows that there's an element of horror to it. You, and that portrays to the reader, oh, this is going to be a scary story, and it's going to be a hidden inside a happy story type of thing. Or like ghost stories, you would want it to portray that there's something supernatural. Really trying to fit the feel of your story on the cover. It's your first impression, and people want to read what they want to read, and you want to make sure that they understand what your book is.
Lastly, I asked Niels if there's any other advice that he would offer to writers and authors out there.
Trust your artist. That's a big one. It's your story. It's your baby. You put a lot of time into creating this story. And there was a an author one time, not too long ago, who, it's a perfect example of an author who is extremely difficult to work with. It was in a book cover group that I'm a part of, and this person was looking for a cover artist, and they came in and they had down to the minute detail what a person should look like. They had uh, the entire book cover, just their imagination put on paper. Everything from shades of gray to blue to the wrinkles in a person's face and the expressions, to the images in the background, the haystacks and the trees, and uh, the symbols, like just chapter after chapter after chapter, paragraph and paragraph of what they wanted this book cover to be. And nobody wanted to work with this author because it was his baby. It was something that uh, he wanted to get the picture out of his head on the paper. But I can guarantee you he would never be happy with the result. Um, Trust your artist, and then try to see it from somebody else's perspective. It's something that you want to try and get out there for you because you're trying to tell that story. But other people, even the readers, when they read your story, are going to have a different image in their head. And an artist should have had years of experience with creating these images and trying to convey those messages. Anyway, I I ramble, but thank you again for having me uh, interview with you guys, and I wish you guys the best of luck. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Niels. That was very informative. You are here with a couple of ramble masters and rabble master. That's me. All right, moving on. The second interview I have lined up for you is a little bit shorter. This one is with Rachel Hardcastle. Um, she is a book cover artist who has evolved into indie publishing. So when I first met her, she was doing a lot of graphic design stuff, and she did a couple of book covers for me. And now she has her own indie publishing outlet called Curious Cat Books out of the UK. You can find her online at curiouscatbooks.co.uk, and she indie publishes book authors' work now. Does a lot of the effort, the editing, um, getting covers done, marketing, um, all sorts of video marketing, things like that. So she's really, you know, a step beyond just the uh, cover art portion of it right now. So I thought that I would talk to her about her perspective from more of a publisher, editor type point of view. So just like with Niels, the first thing I asked her to do was introduce herself.
Hey everyone, my name is Rachel Hardcastle. I run Curious Cat Books in the UK, which is an independent publishing house aimed to help new and struggling authors to get their books out into the world. I have been writing since the age of about 14, so at heart I'm an author, but I now publish for other people, and in doing that I also edit, I format, and I design book covers.
So next, I asked her of all the different things she does. Which ones are the most difficult to do when working with authors, and where some of the trouble spots are.
I think of all the services I provide, the most complicated and the most difficult is probably the editing part, and that's because it's just so subjective. So, what I find as an error, another editor might not be bothered about, and also what they would find, I might not be bothered about. So, I think I always advise authors to hire more than one editor, and that's purely so that they can catch as many errors as possible. I think I love working with authors the most when it comes to children's books because I really enjoy seeing the wonderful illustrations, but I guess this can be difficult when it comes to formatting as well. So formatting, particularly for a preschool book, can also be one of the hardest jobs in this role that I do.
Here she brings up some good points. Editing is always a trouble spot. Um, she makes a good comment that editing is subjective, and what one editor might think is a problem, other editors might not. My philosophy when it comes to editing has always been to provide as much information as possible. Um, so not just the stuff that has to be changed, the stuff that is fundamentally grammatically incorrect or fundamentally confusing, but I try to provide as many comments, as many suggestions as possible, because the author the author, he or she doesn't see that nuance that you're seeing. Otherwise, they would have changed something, right? So, uh, suggestions on word choice, suggestions on eliminating redundancies. The more that you can suggest to the author is going to give them a wider view of that manuscript and allow them to make changes that they think are appropriate. But the bottom line is that the author is going to go through all the comments, and they're going to accept the ones that they agree with, and they're going to reject the ones that they disagree with. Um, there's no harm, no foul in presenting them with more information, uh, as opposed to presenting them with not enough information, which is a foul. Um, but you always want to be clear on those elements that have to be changed. Like this is fundamentally grammatically wrong and must be changed, and just be clear on that. Which ones are suggestions, which ones are mandatory changes. And then she makes another comment about formatting, and yeah, formatting can be very problematic. I've worked with publishers before that were getting started and didn't have a keen eye for formatting. Luckily, Fiction Vortex has this wonderful machine that they use that auto formats everything. Um, Problem with their auto formatting machine uh, is that I think it eliminates almost all the italics. So they get this wonderfully uh, manufactured, properly formatted, brilliantly paperback worthy manuscript, but you got to go through and you got to reset all the italics. For me, for someone who really loves his italics, it can be troublesome. But it saves a lot of the work, all the page page breaks and margins and fonts and scene breaks and everything, all comes out crispy and clean. So that's one thing you can do to uh, help your formatting along, or uh, just get a template and build it the way that you like it, like on Microsoft Word, and then just use that template from then on by injecting chapter by chapter the new book that you want to format. Either way is working, but format, yeah, can be troublesome. So moving on, I asked her lastly, what other advice does she have for writers and authors?
I think the advice I would give to authors about working with cover artists, editors, all the other roles within this industry is just to find people that you really get on with, people that you trust and that you mesh well with, because these people are going to be working on a project that is really close to your heart and it's something that you've put a lot of time and effort into. So it's really important that you find somebody that respects that and who gets your vision. So what I would recommend is that you get kind of some samples from people. You take advantage of any free offers that are going around just so you can get to know that person and the way that they work. Get some samples and then just choose your favourite and go with the one that best fits your needs. If you have any more questions or need further help and advice, you can find me at curiouscatbooks.co.uk, but I'm also on social media at Facebook, Rachel Hardcastle, the same for Instagram, and I'm on Twitter at Hardcastle.
Well, thank you very much to Rachel Hardcastle, who, if her social media is any proof, is crazy busy right now with book releases and all sorts of other shenanigans. A lot of good information, a lot of good advice there. And if you have any interest in what she does, you can look her up at her points of contact that she listed there. I will also search out and see if Niels has a portfolio online that I can link to this video or to this podcast. And that about wraps it up for this mini episode. I just didn't want these great interviews to go to waste, so I just repackaged them here for your benefit. If you have any comments, questions about book covers or working with publishers, editors, both Richie and I have a lot of experience with that. Just leave the comments on Facebook or YouTube or any of our social media, and we'll get back to you. Maybe we'll pick one up, question up as a reader question in the next episode. Episode 6 looks like we're going to be looking at prose, getting down into the nitty gritty, talking about the so-called writing rules and just how rigid and binding they are, and when you want to follow them, when you want to make the exceptions, which ones are more important than other ones, and just in general how to clean up your sentence by sentence writing. So until then, thanks for listening, and see you next time.